Books of the prophets of the Old Testament. In the Bible, a prophet is someone who speaks for God. Though some prophets did predict future events, their main role was to call God's people back to him. Isaiah looked at the failures of all the nations around him and pointed to the future Messiah Jesus, who would bring peace to the people of Israel. Jeremiah had many bad things happen to him, yet he held to his stem message that the people needed to turn back to God. He spoke to Judah in the last decades before Babylon destroyed the nation. Lamentations. All Jeremiah's warnings about Jerusalem came true, and Lamentations records 5 poems of sorrow for the fallen city. Ezekiel spoke to the Jews who were captive in Babylon. He often used dramatic stories and sometimes acted out illustrations to make his point. Daniel. Although he was captive in Babylon, Daniel became prime minister of the government. Daniel lived a life of obedience even when he was faced with pressure from others. Hosea. By marrying a woman who was not faithful to him, Hosea lived out his message. Israel had been spiritually unfaithful to God. Joel. Beginning with a recent plague of locusts in Judah, Joel foretold God's judgment on Judah. Amos preached to Israel during a time of prosperity. He told the people that God would judge them for not helping the poor. Obadiah preached to Israel warnings to Edom, a nation bordering Judah. Jonah reluctantly went to Nineveh and found Israel's enemies responsive to God's message. Micah exposed corruption in every level of society, but he ended his book with a promise of forgiveness and restoration for God's people. Nahum. Long after Jonah had preached in Nineveh and the people had turned to God, Nahum foretold the mighty city's total destruction. Habakkuk addressed his book to God, not people. In a frank dialogue with God, he discussed problems of suffering and justice. Zephaniah focused on the coming day of the Lord, which would destroy Judah. But God would save Jerusalem in the end. Haggai. After returning from the Babylonian captivity, the Jews began rebuilding the temple of God. But soon they set aside that task to work on their own homes. Haggai reminded them to put God first. Zechariah. Writing around the same time as Haggai, Zechariah also urged the Jews to work in the temple. He used a more encouraging approach, describing how the temple would point to the coming Messiah Jesus. Malachi. The last Old Testament prophet, Malachi faced a nation that had grown indifferent to God. He sought to stir the people to turn back